and welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Eunjung Cho. The 2024 presidential candidates differ sharply on key issues, including Korea policy. Today, we discuss with former senior officials how the two candidates might solve the North Korea problem. We also look at the best ways to deal with North Korea's increased saber rattling.
Kamala Harris.
I will not cozy up to tyrants and dictators like Kim Jong-un who are rooting for Trump.
We stopped the missile launches from North Korea now. North Korea is acting up again, but when we get back, I get along with them.
In the studio with me, Ambassador James Jeffrey, chair of the Middle East program at the Wilson Center. Ambassador Jeffrey was the special representative for Syria engagement and the special envoy for the global coalition to defeat ISIS. Ambassador Jeffrey also served as the deputy national security advisor during the George W. Bush administration. He was also the U.S. ambassador to Iraq, Turkey, and to Albania. Also joining us, Mr. Sidney Seiler, Senior Advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Mr. Seiler was former National Intelligence Officer for North Korea on the National Intelligence Council from 2020 to 2023. Mr. Seiler was the Special Envoy for Six-Party Talks and National Security Council Korea Director during the Obama administration. Mr. Seiler also served as a Senior Analyst for U.S. Forces Korea. Mr. Seiler has worked on North Korea issues for over 40 years. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Ambassador Jeffrey, Vice President Harris and former President Trump debated for the first time. And President Trump quoted Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban and claimed that China, Russia, and North Korea are afraid of him. And Vice President Harris criticized President Trump for his personal relationship with Kim Jong-un, whom Vice President Harris called as dictator. And she also said that it is well known that he exchanged love letters with Kim. Now, there were only passing mentions of North Korea during these conversations, but what does this tell us about their perceptions of North Korea and its leader?
Well, first, thank you for having me on. What it tells us is that a Harris administration likely will continue the Biden policy of trying to put the whole North Korea issue on the back burner beyond reassuring South Korea. Whereas President Trump, if he were to be reelected, is much more likely to try again to engage with the North Korean government. We will see how that turns out, but I think that that would be the major difference.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Seiler, President Trump said, look at what's going on with North Korea. How is today's North Korea different from what President Trump or President Biden dealt with in terms of military capabilities, in terms of its strategy towards the United States and South Korea? And has North Korea changed because of its response to U.S. policy, or it was just following its own timetable of weapons development?
Well, as we look at the history of the program, it would be hard to say that back in 1990 there was a 30, 40-year development plan for nuclear weapons. But at the same time, it is clear that this program was pursued methodically and without really significant interruption for those past 3 decades or so. And where we are today was an imaginable place, if we look back in time, of what North would be pursuing. A plutonium path and a highly enriched uranium path to fissile material, missiles from short to medium, intermediate, intercontinental, submarine launched, cruise missiles that would all be nuclear capable, warheads that would be accommodated by those delivery systems, And of course, following the development and demonstration of these capabilities, you then follow it with deployment and some type of doctrine. And we've seen that Kim Jong-un trying to give the impression of a deployed nuclear force. I don't think that the actions that we've seen over the last 4 years in regard to the advancement of the program were a result of bad U.S. policy or provocations or hostile policy if you tend to be sympathetic to North Korea, but rather these were directions that the North was headed anyway, and of course it's made progress. The program's qualitatively and quantitatively advancing. At the same time, North Korea remains under sanctions, remains under pressure, remains stigmatized because of its nuclear program. So from Pyongyang's perspective, there's been some gains in other areas where simply, the regime continues to muddle through.
Mm-hmm. It's a different North Korea in the sense that it doesn't want to talk to the United States anymore, isn't it?
It's hard to say that that's a permanent factor going forward. It's clear that following Hanoi, Kim Jong-un realized that neither a Democratic or a Republican president, regardless of promises from Seoul and whether Seoul had a moderate, conservative or progressive leader, that he was going to gain acceptance for his nuclear weapons program. So I think over time, as the program grew and the transparency grew and the signaling from Pyongyang reinforced that North Korea was an irreversible nuclear weapons power, engaging Washington became more and more problematic. So we are probably at a point where, again, the refusal to engage the Biden administration was not because he didn't like Joe Biden like he liked Donald Trump, but rather this is just the progress of his nuclear program, and going forward, it's going to be hard for our two sides to talk about anything as long as the nuclear issue is off the table from Pyongyang's perspective.
Ambassador Jeffrey, Mr. Seiler just talked about how North Korea wants to portray itself as an irreversible nuclear power. Under that condition, can President Trump revive his personal diplomacy with North Korea? Would Vice President Harris be able to continue Biden administration's calibrated and practical approach, criticized by some as a repeat of Obama administration's strategic patience?
Well, first of all, priority one is to ensure that the South Korean people can continue to live in peace and prosperity and rely on the United States. Whatever a Harris or a Trump administration does towards North Korea has to have that first priority in mind. Now, the problem is, given the number of nuclear weapons and the investment, political and financial, that North Korea has placed in this, they clearly are not going to give these up. Yet, for global reasons that go far beyond North Korea, the United States is hamstrung in trying to talk to North Korea on any basis other than our desire or demand to stop being a nuclear power and give up the nuclear weapons. So it's very hard to see how the talks would go forward. Unlike with the Soviet Union and later Russia, it's not about limiting numbers or having balance. It's about our position and the North Korean positions are simply totally incompatible.
Ambassador Jeffrey, how is it totally incompatible?
Because North Korea is not feeling sufficient pressure. It has, particularly at present, more support from China and Russia than it had, for example, in the Bush administration. There's less effort by them to try to get North Korea to rein in its nuclear program. It obviously is an economic disaster, and nothing we can do or not do is going to change that very much. And the regime sees, as real experts, and I'm not one of them, you typically emphasize, the regime sees its survival tied to a robust nuclear weapons capability. So what can we offer or what can we threaten to get them to change something as fundamental as that? My answer, from having done negotiations all around the world, is nothing.
Ambassador Jeffrey, Vice President Kamala Harris' campaign has outlined her policy agenda on the website A New Way Forward. The website contains no reference of denuclearizing North Korea, only mentions Vice President visiting DMZ. 2024 Republican Party and Democratic Party platform also do not mention anything about denuclearizing North Korea. There is concerns that United States may be pursuing risk reduction and disarmament talks with North Korea and not complete denuclearization, and may give an impression that the United States is accepting North Korea as a nuclear power. Based on what we see from these platforms, does the U.S. have a fait accompli that North Korea denuclearizing is unrealistic?
This is tough to answer because it involves what candidates really think and how strongly they think it. I stand by my position that we will not move off of the demand that North Korea totally denuclearize. But the reason that those things are not emphasized or even mentioned in the two-party platforms is that because neither thinks that they will get that, they don't see any purpose in a political campaign to emphasizing something that people would point at and say, well, that sounds silly. But they're not going to give up that goal for reasons that go far beyond North Korea. And so they will, at least at a low level, raise that in any talks that do occur and check the box, if you will, that that is our policy. Then they will try to, as Mr. Seiler said, achieve the opposite from what North Korea wants, which is what we want in all of the 15 or 20 conflicts we're simultaneously involved in around the world. Remember that about America, and that is calm down, everybody de-escalate, be stable, don't make headlines. But as we just heard, that's not how North Korea looks at things, and I would also say how Iran, Russia, and other states, Venezuela, look at things. So that's our global problem.
So you said many times during this conversation that the United States will never give up on denuclearizing North Korea as a goal. But some observers are wondering if the goalpost has moved from complete denuclearization to just some sort of disarmament talks with North Korea, just taking into account the realistic circumstances.
That's a very good point, Un-Young. And I would recommend that if North Korea continues the set of very aggressive moves it has made, including the most recent flaunting of a new enrichment capability, South Korea now as a #1 threat, and other steps, that the United States should consider in stages playing the nuclear card. We are developing, thanks to the Congress, not the Biden administration, a tactical nuclear-armed cruise missile for submarines. That, like in the 1980s, could be deployed on the ground. There are various stages from temporary deployments to deployments under American control to, like NATO, dual key, all the way to giving it to South Korea. And I think one way to move forward would be a freeze for freeze. We would not move in that direction if North Korea slowed down its development. But that would require very tough and very effective negotiations.
Mr. Seiler, the media says North Korea wants President Trump to win, but during the Trump administration, a North Korea diplomat told a VOA reporter that President Trump was not following through on his friendly talks about North Korea. Based on actual actions and not just rhetorics of the Republican and Democratic administrations, can we simplistically assume that North Korea wants a particular candidate to win in U.S. elections?
I think it's important not to assume that, and that sources' comment is quite interesting because after Kim Jong-un's failure in Hanoi to come to the table and seriously engage President Trump, we began to see in North Korea media hints that what had been previously trumpeted as the future of U.S.-DPRK relations following the Singapore summit, that the United States had finally come to its senses, accepted North Korea as a nuclear weapons state. And part of it was because of this unique relationship that their leader, Kim Jong-un, had with Donald Trump. They began to walk that back because it was no longer credible, because the regime was having difficulty telling its internal audience why Hanoi failed. You know, why suddenly was this path with the United States that we thought we were on not a viable path. And so what they did was they began to float these ideas that, you know, it was not Kim Jong-un's fault for misjudging Donald Trump. It was Donald Trump's fault for not living up to his words. And that began, to me, to signal an indication that, as we've seen in the past at various levels, where North Korea will express a sense that nothing more is to be gained from talking, whether it's a ROC president, even the words directed towards President Moon Jae-in about what a waste of time inter-Korean engagement was in 2018. It slowed the program because they were distracted by a path that wasn't really there. And so my sense is that, North Korea would face a dilemma of expectations of re-engaging. We see the expectations out there. The love letters will resume, and President Trump himself is signaling a willingness to engage. North Korea may not want to engage, or it would make their life a little bit more complicated than simply what they've had under the Biden administration, which is, just the ability to repeatedly ignore invitations to dialogue. I think even with the Harris administration, it'd be problematic because it'll be that same offer of dialogue as long as it's about denuclearization, as long as it's leading to tension reduction, two goals that North Korea does not share. So I don't think North Korea is betting too much on either candidate winning or losing, regardless of whether Kim might privately think it would be better one way or another.
And Ambassador Jeffrey, it's been 40 years since the United States had North Korea policy, held negotiations with North Korea policy to denuclearize North Korea, and the problem is becoming more and more intractable. And recently, South Korea's Defense Minister Kim Yong-hyun said that fundamental solution to North Korea's nuclear and missile program and abuse of human rights would be unification between the two Koreas. And there are growing voices who endorse that, both in Washington and Seoul. Do you think that would be the fundamental solution to the North Korea problem?
Well, first of all, unification, and I was involved with German unification for 3 years as it happened. Unification, first of all, is something for the two populations and the leadership to decide. What we learned the hard way in 1989 and 1990 is if the two populations want to go in a certain direction, we can't stop it. The best thing is to go with it. But that requires both sides, and the side we'll put most of the focus on is the South. If South Koreans want to pursue that, the United States, I don't think, would try to get in the way. We may not like it, but I don't think we get in the way.
Why would the United States not like it, though?
The United States does not like, and as I said, I have my German experience where we were committed to reunification of the two Germanys since 1945. We do not like any change in the global situation because it requires more work and focus. When you've got Ukraine burning, you've got Venezuela threatening its neighbors, you've got obviously the Gaza situation, Iranian missiles flying through the air. It's tough being Washington, believe me.
And attached to that is the likelihood that any type of unification of that model would incur some degree of bloodletting. There's not going to be a conflict-free unification of the peninsula, and the instability and uncertainty that brings, like you mentioned, Ambassador, just makes it hard to imagine a process that would be so easy we would readily agree with it.
Mr. Seiler, you were Korea director during the Obama administration at the National Security Council. Towards the end of the Obama administration, because of the deadlock and stalemate in negotiations with North Korea, there were a lot of public talks by U.S. officials, senior State Department officials about unification of the two Koreas.
Yes.
And what was the background for that?
When you look at the situation on the Korean Peninsula, everybody wants change in North Korea. Everybody wants a change in posture, a change in behavior, a change in threat. Problem is, it's not a flick of a switch. It is a process that is just fraught with uncertainties and dangers and risk that until now, we have been unwilling to embrace. Denuclearization would be greatly served by unification of the peninsula. I think that's hard to deny. It may be the only path to denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. And I think that's why, occasionally having these discussions, such as that prompted by President Yoon's most recent unification doctrine announcement, it's a worthwhile topic to discuss.
Ambassador Jeffrey, Kim Jong-un again vowed to increase his nuclear arsenal exponentially, visited uranium enrichment facility. North Korea is such a nuclear threat. How does that change United States and South Korea's perception of crisis? And is North Korea trying to raise the stakes of negotiations before U.S. presidential elections?
I think he is. We've seen that with him and his predecessors in prior elections, and we see it among other countries with whom we have problems. It's a rich environment to try to make trouble. Nonetheless, these steps I do not think are dramatic enough, particularly with the preoccupation we have on the election, Ukraine and Gaza right now, to lead to a major American shift in position, be it on tactical nukes in and around Korea, be it on a really new approach with North Korea. But we'll see.
This is a 22-year-old story, right? Jim Kelly, Assistant Secretary of State for East Asia, first traveled to Pyongyang in October 2002 to confront North Korea on the evidence that we had that they were pursuing a production scale, highly enriched uranium program. And it's been 22 years that North Korea has denied that program. They denied it to Secretary Kelly. They denied it to negotiators, including Chris Hill, during the six-party talks. They denied it to the Obama team. And of course, Hanoi, they denied it as well. So in this regard, the capabilities we saw are not a surprise to us. They are seeking to define and portray an impression of a irreversible nuclear power. But this does not represent, to me, some major surge in the capabilities of North Korea.
And Mr. Seiler, North Korea provided a rare glimpse into its highly enrichment program with the photos of centrifuges with Kim Jong-un next to it. Given that it is very difficult to detect uranium enrichment, especially in far and hard to reach places, isn't it impossible to have some kind of negotiations or arms control talks with North Korea over uranium enrichment in the first place?
I think if North Korea is sincere, imagine a North Korea that makes a strategic decision that it wants to explore the path that it has repeatedly rejected of an improved relationship with the United States and integration into the international community, economic and energy aid and assistance, all the good things that would come from moving credibly down a path of denuclearization, that they would be presenting to us feasible declarations of their current capabilities, that they would be cooperative to some degree in verification regimes that would help us address the question of how many more and how much worse is it. North Korea has rejected this, and it kind of makes it easy from an analytic perspective to say North Korea is not interested in denuclearization. It should have put its program on the table in a credible way and be willing to have the types of verification mechanisms because they've made a strategic decision to move in a different direction. I think it's possible.
Ambassador Jeffrey, North Korea seems to be capitalizing on geostrategic opportunities to build up its nuclear arsenal, capitalizing on international conflicts such as Israel-Hamas war and the war in Ukraine. How will these two wars unfold? And when they end, how would that impact North Korea, which has been benefiting by exporting weapons to Russia and closer ties with Russia?
This is so important because you're absolutely right. North Korea has benefited because Russia, and particularly China, had real concerns about nuclear proliferation. In China, it's obvious what North Korea can do, South Korea, Taiwan, and Japan could do in months, if not sooner. But now that you have this coalescing between two camps, North Korea is finding itself in the, if you will, axis of evil camp, and it's benefiting from it. But it's a two-edged sword. North Korea is under somewhat more influence from Russia and China now than it was before, and that is a way, first of all, they do not want a war in Korea on top of everything else. I think they share that with us. And secondly, if we can find a way to resolve the Ukraine conflict, which President Trump certainly will attempt to do, and I think Harris too, although she isn't saying it now, there's a possibility that can then lead to a calming on the peninsula.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week. Mr. Seiler, Ambassador Jeffrey, thank you so much for joining us.
Great.
And thank you for watching. We'll be back here next week with U.S. experts to discuss the two Koreas and the region and the world right here from Washington.